My name is Hattie K. Myers, and I am 16 years old. I always knew I was unwanted, and I'm not saying that in the oops, I was an accident way. I mean, my parents actually said they wish they only had one kid, my twin sister Sarah. They said it like it was normal, like they were commenting on the weather, like I was some extra thing that came in the box that they never ordered. Growing up in that house felt like living in someone else's family, like I was an unwanted guest who forgot to leave. Sarah was the star of the show. She had her own room, decorated like a magazine spread, pink curtains, Disney bedspread, shelves full of toys that looked like they'd been arranged by a professional. My room was a tiny space with an old bed that squeaked every time I moved, and a dresser that looked like it had survived the 70s and wanted to retire. Every morning felt like a reminder of where I ranked. I'd wake up and hear my parents talking about buying Sarah new clothes or taking her to gymnastics or whatever she wanted that week, and meanwhile I was left to figure out how to get through the day without needing anything. Why can't you be more like your sister? Got said so often it felt like it was my name. It wasn't just at home either. School wasn't an escape. At parent-teacher conferences, they spent the whole time gushing over Sarah's finger paintings like she was Picasso. My teacher would hand them my report card and they wouldn't even look at it. I was working my butt off for good grades, thinking maybe if I was perfect enough they'd notice me, but it didn't matter. Sarah could breathe and they'd clap. I could win a prize and they'd forget it happened. The stuff difference was obvious, but the little things hurt more. Sarah's toys were treated like sacred relics. If I touched one, she'd scream and my parents would come running like I'd committed a crime. I'd get scolded for not respecting her space, even if I was just looking. Dinner was the same story every night. Sarah got first pick, biggest slice, best cut, the good part. I got leftovers, and if I complained, my mom would give me that look and say, "Be grateful you're getting anything at all." Like feeding me was charity, like I was a stray they felt obligated to tolerate. The only person who made me feel seen was my grandfather. He was different. He didn't act like I was invisible. On weekends, I'd go to his place, and he'd take me fishing, or sit on the porch and tell me stories. He made me feel like I was worth something, like I wasn't just the unwanted twin. For a few hours each week, I felt like a normal kid, not a tag-along nobody wanted. Then he got sick, cancer, and even then my parents tried to shut me out. They'd take Sarah to visit him, bring her flowers, let her stand at the bedside like she was the only grandchild that mattered. I was told to stay home because they needed me to help around the house. It was a lie. I'd sneak out and visit him anyway. He'd squeeze my hand and tell me I was strong, tell me he was proud of me for sticking it out, but I could see the worry in his eyes, like he knew exactly what would happen to me when he wasn't there to buffer the cruelty. When he passed, it felt like the one good thing in my life got ripped away. My parents didn't ask if I was okay. They were too busy making sure Sarah was handling it, like she was the only one who lost someone. At the funeral, they had her standing at the front with them while I was shoved to the back like they were embarrassed to be seen with me. I felt more alone than I ever had. After that, things got worse. Any scraps of attention I used to get disappeared. I became a ghost in my own home. I'd sit at the dinner table and my parents would talk to Sarah like I wasn't there. Family photos were a collection of my elbow or the back of my head. If someone flipped through our album, they'd barely know I existed. I tried standing up for myself sometimes, like when Sarah got another new dress and I asked why I never got anything new. My mom would brush me off. "Sarah has activities," she'd say. "You're fine with what you have." If I pushed, I'd get yelled at for being selfish, for making everything about me. So I learned to shut up. I learned to disappear on command. I became really good at blending into the background so I wouldn't have to hear those words again. But even when I tried to disappear, it didn't stop the comments. My dad would look at me like I was a problem and say, "You need to shape up." Sarah would turn on tears whenever she wanted something, and my parents would rush to her like she was fragile glass. I learned early it didn't matter what I did. I was never going to be the favorite. And that messes with your head. You start believing you really are the problem. I spent years lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could vanish and make their lives easier, because that's what they made me feel like my existence was a burden. I turned 16 thinking I was halfway to freedom. I was counting down the days until I could get out and build a life somewhere they couldn't reach me. I wasn't prepared for what came next. I always knew my family favored Sarah, but I didn't know they were capable of turning that favoritism into something even colder, something that would push me out the door for good. I always knew my parents loved Sarah more, but what happened next still felt like getting shoved off a cliff you didn't even know you were standing near. Because it wasn't just favoritism anymore, it was them choosing her future over my existence, out loud, in real time, without hesitation. Sarah got pregnant at 16. Yep, 16 years old and already playing house. And who was the dad? Some 19-year-old guy who barely graduated high school, bouncing between dead-end jobs like commitment was a rumor. When my parents found out, I expected screaming, consequences, lectures about responsibility, the kind of reaction adults are supposed to have when their kid is about to become a kid with a kid. Instead, they were excited, not quietly relieved, not pretending, genuinely excited. My mom cried happy tears. My dad actually smiled, like someone had handed him a trophy. They kept calling Sarah our little girl and talking about being grandparents like it was a promotion, like she'd achieved something. I stood there in the hallway, listening and thinking, are we all living in the same reality? They threw together a shotgun wedding so fast it was like they were racing a clock. One day I was in my tiny room trying to do homework, and the next my mom was yelling at me to get dressed because we were going to a wedding. No one asked how I felt. No one cared. The whole thing was a blur of cheap flowers, forced smiles, and Sarah acting like she was the main character in a movie where mistakes magically become blessings. A couple weeks after the wedding, my mom called me downstairs. She had that smile on her face that I learned to hate over the years, the one she used when she knew what she was about to say would hurt, and she didn't want to deal with my reaction. My dad stood behind her with his arms crossed like backup, like they were about to announce a rule change and expected me to obey. She started talking about how Sarah's baby was coming soon and how they were going to need more space. I remember sitting on the couch thinking, okay, and why are you telling me this? Then she said it. We need your room for the baby. My room. The one place I could close a door and pretend I existed. The smallest, crappiest room in the house, but it was mine. I stared at her like maybe she'd realize how insane that sounded. She didn't. She just kept talking like she was explaining a reasonable household rearrangement. I asked, so what am I supposed to do? My mom shrugged. You're old enough to figure it out. Then, like she couldn't help herself, she added, you should be grateful we let you stay as long as we did. Grateful for being tolerated. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to step in, to say something even slightly human. He didn't. He just nodded like this was the natural order of things. You're a young woman now, he said. Time you start taking responsibility for yourself. Like it was totally normal to kick out your teenage daughter because your golden child decided to have a baby. That night, I packed my stuff, what little I had. A couple bags of clothes, some school books, and a few things my grandfather had given me, the only items that ever felt like proof I mattered to someone. I looked around my room one last time. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Now it was going to be a nursery. And I was going to be outside. I asked them again where I was supposed to go. They didn't answer with anything useful. We're sure you'll figure something out, my dad said. My mom added, we're doing this for your sister. She needs us right now. I wanted to scream, what about me? When have you ever needed me? But I already knew the answer. They didn't need me. They never had. I was just the extra twin they never asked for. The easiest one to remove. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed an old tent from the garage and set it up in the backyard. It wasn't even a dramatic decision. It was survival. I remember pushing the stakes into the ground with shaking hands, trying to pretend I was camping, trying to pretend it was temporary. The first night, I lay on the hard ground, listening to the house. I could hear them eating dinner, laughing, talking about baby names and nursery colors. It was like I was a stray dog they'd put outside, close enough to keep an eye on, far enough not to be a bother. Winter hit and everything got worse. The cold seeped into my bones like it was looking for a permanent home. I bundled up in every layer I owned. I used a flashlight to do homework in the tent because I was still trying, still clinging to school like it was the only door out. But my grades started slipping. It's hard to focus on algebra when your hands are numb and you're wondering if you'll wake up with frost on your eyelashes. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy redecorating my old room, painting walls, buying baby furniture, making everything perfect for Sarah's new family. I was just the ghost in the backyard, the one they didn't have to worry about anymore. I started doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, anything that paid cash. Mowing lawns, shoveling snow, carrying groceries for old people. Some doors slammed in my face. Some people looked at me like I was a beggar. A few gave me work, and I was grateful for every dollar. I'd come back to my tent with a sandwich and eat it slowly like it was a feast, pretending I didn't care that my own parents were eating warm meals 10 steps away. The worst part was knowing if my grandfather were still alive, he wouldn't have let this happen. He would have taken me in without questions, but without him, I was alone, and my parents had already spun their version of events to anyone who might ask. I was the difficult one, the troublemaker, the ungrateful kid who refused to follow rules. They made it sound like I chose to live outside, like it was a dramatic teenage phase instead of something they forced on me. One night, lying in that tent while the wind whipped the fabric so hard it felt like the world was trying to peel me out of existence, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding. They never cared. They pushed me out without a second thought. I was nothing to them except a problem that was finally gone. And that's when something in me hardened, not into cruelty, into resolve. I stopped hoping they'd change. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I made a decision in the dark, with my breath fogging the air in front of my face. I was done trying to win their approval. If they didn't want me, fine. I was going to find a way out, and I was going to build a life they couldn't touch. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in that backyard forever, listening to them live like I didn't exist. I was going to leave, and I was going to survive. I didn't leave the backyard in some dramatic blaze of independence. I didn't slam doors or announce I was done. I just stopped sleeping there. One morning, after another night of shivering so hard my teeth wouldn't stop clicking, I packed my school bag, folded the tent as neatly as I could, and walked out of the yard before anyone woke up. No goodbye. No note. I figured if they didn't notice me freezing outside, they wouldn't notice me leaving either. I didn't have a plan. That's the part people always assume you do, that there's some secret roadmap to survival. There wasn't. I just knew I couldn't go back. I spent the day at school trying to stay awake, my head pounding, my body aching. When the last bell rang, I didn't go home. I wandered. I walked streets I didn't usually take, just trying to stay warm and distracted. That's how I ended up standing outside a small bakery I'd passed 100 times before but never really looked at. The smell hit me first. Warm bread, sugar, butter. It was torture and comfort at the same time. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring through the window at trays of loaves cooling behind the glass. I must have looked awful because the door opened and this older guy stepped out. Thick arms dusted with flour, face set in a permanent scowl that looked like it had lived there for decades. "You gonna come in or just fog up my window?" he asked. I froze. "Sorry." He studied me for a second, eyes sharp. "You hungry or you looking for work?" I didn't even hesitate. Work. That was Frank. He didn't ask about my parents. Didn't ask why I looked exhausted or why my jacket was too thin for the weather. He just told me he needed someone to sweep, clean, and haul deliveries. Cash pay. Early mornings. No excuses. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The bakery opened before sunrise. 4 in the morning felt brutal at first, but walking into that warmth after nights in the cold felt like stepping into another world. My back ached from mopping floors and lifting flour bags that weighed almost as much as I did, but I didn't complain. Frank noticed. He always noticed. He didn't praise, but sometimes he'd grunt and say, "Good," like it cost him something. He fed me too, nothing fancy. Day-old bread, a pastry that cracked on the edges. It was more than food. It was proof I wasn't invisible. I wasn't begging. I was earning. After a couple weeks, Frank asked where I was sleeping. I tried to dodge the question, but he wasn't buying it. He sighed, rubbed his face, and told me he had a storage room above the bakery. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's warm." The room was tiny. One narrow bed, a slanted ceiling, a window that barely opened. But it had walls, a door, heat. I moved in that night with everything I owned in 2 bags. I slept for 10 hours straight and woke up confused because I wasn't cold. I threw myself into the job. I showed up early, stayed late, learned everything I could. Frank started teaching me how to knead dough properly, how to tell when bread was done just by tapping the bottom. He talked while we worked about how his own dad had kicked him out for being a screw-up, how he built the bakery from nothing. I think he saw himself in me, whether he wanted to admit it or not. School was still a mess. My grades weren't great, but I stayed enrolled. I did homework in the bakery after closing, my notebooks smelling like flour and sugar. I saved every dollar I could, living like I still had nothing. Bread and soup, no extras. Survival mode had rewired my brain, and I wasn't turning it off yet. One day, Frank handed me an envelope. My first real paycheck. It wasn't a lot, but it felt like everything. I stared at it like it was proof I existed. Life settled into a routine. Brutal but steady. Work, school, sleep, repeat. There were days I felt the weight of it all, watching families come into the bakery laughing together, parents picking out treats for their kids. I'd step into the back room sometimes just to breathe, but I didn't quit. Frank gave me keys one night, said it was in case I needed to lock up. It was trust, even if he didn't say it out loud. And trust changes you. It makes you want to be better, to live up to it. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Frank hinted at it too, warned me not to get stuck. So I started picking up more work. Convenience store shifts, landscaping on weekends, anything that paid. I was tired all the time, but it was a good tired, a tired that came from building something instead of being discarded. I didn't realize it then, but that bakery was my turning point. Not because it saved me, but because it showed me I could save myself, one small step at a time. The bakery was never meant to be my destination. Frank made that clear without ever saying it directly. He'd tell me stories while kneading dough about people who got comfortable too early and stayed stuck forever. Comfort is fine, he'd mutter, as long as it doesn't turn into a cage. I took that to heart. I worked like the bakery was my lifeline, but I planned like it was a stepping stone. I stacked jobs the way some people stack excuses. Early mornings at the bakery, afternoons at school, evenings picking up shifts wherever I could find them. Convenience store, landscaping, cleaning out garages. I learned how to say yes without hesitation and no without apology. I saved everything. Lived like I still had nothing, because part of me was terrified that if I relaxed even a little, it could all disappear. Years passed like that. Not in a montage way, not fast and glamorous, but slow and repetitive. I finished high school, took community college classes at night, learned budgeting the hard way by not having anything left over. I watched other kids complain about parents being strict or boring, and I bit my tongue because I would have killed for boring. When I finally had enough saved for a down payment, I didn't tell anyone. Not Frank, not friends, definitely not my family. I found a modest 3-bedroom house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, no marble counters or dramatic staircases, but it had solid bones and a quiet street, and when I stood in the empty living room holding the keys, my hands shook. Not from fear, from pride. I slept on an air mattress for weeks, used cardboard boxes as furniture. Every paycheck went toward making the place livable. A couch from a thrift store, a cheap table, a lamp that flickered if you bumped it. I didn't care. Every piece felt earned. Every corner felt like proof I belonged somewhere. That illusion shattered the day my doorbell rang. I opened it, and there they were. My parents. Sarah, her husband, their kids, all standing on my porch, smiling like we were about to take a family photo. My mom gasped and said, "Surprise," like this was a gift. She hugged me without asking, already stepping inside, already looking around like she was assessing property value. "We heard you bought a house," she said. "We're so proud of you." Proud. The word felt foreign coming from her mouth. Sarah pushed forward, baby on her hip, scanning my entryway like she was appraising it. "Nice place," she said. "You've done well for yourself." My stomach dropped. They'd only ever shown up when they wanted something. My dad cleared his throat, that old authoritative sound he used when he thought he still controlled the room. "With Sarah's family growing," he began, "and you having all this space to yourself, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones." There it was. My mom smiled wider. "Family should stick together. Wouldn't it be nice if we all lived here together? One big, happy family." I stared at them, memories crashing into me all at once. The tent, the cold, the nights listening to them laugh while I froze, the bakery floor under my knees at 4 a.m, the years of silence. And now they wanted to move in like none of it happened. "No," I said. The smiles dropped. My mom blinked like she hadn't heard me right. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. "That's not happening." "But we're family," she insisted, like that word erased history. "Where was family when I was 16 and sleeping in a tent in the backyard?" I asked. "Where was family when I was working before sunrise just to eat?" My dad's face flushed. He puffed up, tried intimidation. "Now listen here." "No," I cut him off. You listen. I built this place myself. You don't get to show up now and take it. Sarah scoffed. Don't be selfish. We need the space. You owe us. I felt something snap, clean and final. I owe you nothing, I said. You kicked me out when I was a kid, left me with nothing. Get out. For a second, no one moved. Then my mom tried again, softer, manipulative. We know we made mistakes. We're trying to make things right. You're trying to move in because I have something you want, I said. That's not making things right. They left in silence. I watched their car disappear down the street, my chest tight with a mix of relief and grief. I'd spent years waiting for them to care. Now that they were here, I realized I didn't want them anymore. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The house was quiet. Mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty protecting it. I didn't know then that this wouldn't be the end. Toxic people don't disappear just because you say no. But that day, I learned something important. I could stand my ground, and I wouldn't give it up again. I thought saying no would be enough. I really did. I figured once they realized I wasn't that scared kid anymore, they'd back off and find another target. That was my mistake. People who feel entitled don't retreat quietly. They regroup. 2 weeks after they showed up at my door, I came home from work and found an official-looking envelope tucked into my mailbox. Thick paper. Legal font. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Standing in my driveway, keys still in my hand, I ripped it open and scanned the first paragraph. My sister Sarah was contesting my ownership of the house, claiming it should be considered shared family property. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I read it again just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They really couldn't stand the idea of me having one thing that wasn't theirs. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office for the first time in my life. Her name was Karen, which felt ironic in a way I couldn't fully appreciate yet. She was sharp, efficient, and didn't waste time on sympathy. She skimmed the notice, then looked up at me. They don't have a leg to stand on, she said, but they can make your life annoying for a while if they want. Annoying was an understatement. Within days, I started getting calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old family friends, distant cousins, people who knew nothing about my life except whatever version my parents fed them. Why are you doing this? They'd ask. Why can't you just help your family? Some were gentle, others accusatory. None of them asked what it was like to be kicked out at 16. My parents were working overtime on the narrative. In their version, I was the ungrateful daughter who took advantage of them, who used family money to buy a house and then turned her back on everyone. It was surreal hearing lies told so confidently that some people believed them without question. For a split second, it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. Karen told me to document everything. Every receipt, every job, every bank statement, every dollar that went into that house. I spent nights pulling together folders, organizing my entire adult life into neat piles of proof. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Every document reminded me I had done this on my own. Then Karen called me back into her office. Her tone was different this time. Not dismissive, focused. She slid a stack of papers across the desk. I dug into your family's financial history, she said. Specifically, why they think they're entitled to anything of yours. What I read made my hands shake. My grandfather had left me an inheritance, a substantial one. It was meant to be transferred to me when I turned 18. But my parents had used a legal loophole to access it early. They'd been spending it for years, paying off debts, funding Sarah's wedding, propping up Sarah's husband's failed business, even part of the down payment for their house. While I was sleeping in a tent, I felt sick. Not just angry, betrayed in a way that went deeper than anything before. Every time I wondered why they could afford vacations and upgrades while I couldn't even afford heat, the answer had been right there. They'd let me struggle because my struggle funded their comfort. Karen didn't sugarcoat it. This isn't just morally wrong, she said. It's illegal. Something inside me hardened. They wanted my house. Fine. I was going to take back everything they stole from me. We filed suit. Fraud, theft, misuse of funds. The papers were served quietly, professionally. And suddenly, my phone lit up like it was on fire. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from my mom, my dad, Sarah, all saying the same thing. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Court dragged on for months. They tried to paint me as greedy, vindictive, unstable. My lawyer calmly dismantled every claim with documents they couldn't argue with. The judge listened. The evidence spoke louder than their tears. When the ruling came down in my favor, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, relief. The kind that lets you finally exhale. They were ordered to repay everything, plus damages. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I realized something important. I wasn't fighting them anymore. I was done. They tried to apologize later. Too late. Apologies mean nothing when they only show up after consequences. I blocked their numbers, changed my locks, drew a line that couldn't be crossed again. I went home to my house, sat on my couch, and for the first time, the silence felt safe. I thought winning in court would end it. I really did. I believed that once a judge put it in writing, once the truth was stamped with authority, they'd finally leave me alone. That belief lasted exactly 3 days. The first message came from my mother. Not angry, not apologetic, soft, careful. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't reply. Then my father tried. Long voicemail about misunderstandings and family loyalty. Sarah sent a message filled with crying emojis and vague lines about how none of this had to happen. I deleted every single one without listening all the way through. But they weren't done. They never are. Karen called me late one afternoon. Something came up, she said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. Your parents are trying to delay payment, claiming financial hardship. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Financial hardship after years of spending my inheritance, after funding Sarah's lifestyle, after trying to steal my house. Of course they are. Karen sighed. There's more. While digging through additional records, we found inconsistencies that go beyond your inheritance, a pattern. This isn't the first time they've done this. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me. I was just the one who finally pushed back hard enough to crack the surface. Turns out my parents had a history of borrowing money that wasn't theirs. Small trust funds from extended relatives, loans they never intended to repay, accounts opened in other people's names, always just enough to get by, never enough to raise red flags until now. My inheritance had simply been the biggest, longest-running source. When Sarah found out Karen had uncovered more, she panicked. She showed up at my house unannounced one evening, pounding on the door like she owned the place. I didn't open it. I watched her through the window as she screamed about betrayal, about how I was destroying the family, about how I was just jealous because she had kids and I didn't. That part almost broke me. Almost. I opened the door just enough to speak. You stole from me, I said quietly. You all did, and you would have kept going if I hadn't stopped you. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. For the first time in her life, no one was rushing in to save her. No parents, no excuses, no soft landings, just consequences. The legal pressure mounted. Creditors started calling them. Other relatives began asking questions. The version of events my parents had been telling for years started to fall apart under scrutiny. People who once defended them went silent. Some reached out to me privately, apologizing for believing the lies. My parents stopped contacting me altogether, not because they understood, because they were scared. And that's when I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. They never loved me less than Sarah. They loved control more than either of us. Sarah was useful. I wasn't. Until suddenly, I was the one holding all the leverage. That realization hurt in a strange, hollow way, but it also freed me. I wasn't responsible for fixing them. I never had been. I focused on my life, on my work, on making my house feel like a home instead of a fortress. I painted the walls, planted a small garden, bought furniture without worrying it might disappear. Every small decision felt like reclaiming something they'd taken. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the kid I used to be, the one in the tent, the one who believed love had to be earned through silence and suffering. I wished I could tell her that survival wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof of strength no one could steal. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I refused to disappear again. By the time the call stopped, I knew something had shifted. Not healed, not resolved, just done. People like my parents don't change because they understand. They change because they run out of options, and they were running out fast. The repayment deadline came and went. Partial payments trickled in at first, clearly scraped together in a panic. Then nothing. Karen filed the enforcement motion without hesitation. Liens were placed, accounts frozen, assets reviewed. The same system they had gamed for years finally turned on them, cold and mechanical. No favoritism, no golden child, no excuses. Sarah tried one last tactic. She showed up at my workplace, not screaming this time, crying, real tears, or at least better rehearsed ones. She caught me in the parking lot as I was getting into my car, blocking the door with her body like she used to when we were kids, and she wanted something I had. "Please," she said, "just talk to me." I stood there, keys in my hand, feeling oddly detached. "About what?" "About us," she whispered. "About everything. We're sisters." That word used to gut me. Now it just sounded empty. "You stopped being my sister the day you watched me get kicked out and did nothing," I said. "And then you spent money that wasn't yours while I slept in a tent." She flinched like I'd hit her. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected. She started sobbing harder, talking about stress, about how our parents controlled everything, about how she felt trapped. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered her standing in my doorway, telling me I owed her space in my house. "I'm not your way out," I said quietly. "You never were." I got in my car and drove away. She didn't follow. That was how I knew it was over. The court finalized everything a month later. Full repayment ordered. No appeals left. My parents downsized, sold their house, moved into something smaller, quieter, cheaper. The family image they worked so hard to protect dissolved under its own weight. People stopped asking me to forgive. They stopped calling me dramatic. Silence replaced judgment, and I welcomed it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, grounded, like I could finally stand without bracing for impact. I started volunteering at a youth shelter not far from where I used to work odd jobs. I didn't tell anyone my story. I just listened, helped kids fill out job applications, showed them how to budget small amounts of money, watched their shoulders relax when they realized someone wasn't going to disappear on them. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about my grandfather, about how he saw me when no one else did, about how he left me something my parents tried to erase, not just money, proof. I wasn't unwanted, I was inconvenient, and there's a difference. The strange thing about peace is how quiet it is when it finally arrives. There's no music cue, no victory speech, just mornings where you wake up and realize you're not bracing yourself for bad news anymore. That's how it started for me. One ordinary morning, sunlight coming through my kitchen window, coffee brewing, my phone silent. No missed calls, no legal updates, no family drama waiting to ambush me before breakfast. It took time to trust that silence. For years, quiet meant neglect. It meant being forgotten. But this was different. This was earned. I finished furnishing the house slowly, intentionally. Every piece had a story, a table I saved 3 months for, a couch I carried in myself because I wanted to remember that I could. I framed one photo of my grandfather and hung it in the hallway. No family portraits, no forced smiles, just the person who saw me when I was invisible. Work stabilized too. Without the constant stress of fighting for my own space, I had room to think bigger. I took on projects I'd been avoiding, asked for opportunities I used to think I didn't deserve. The confidence didn't come from money or winning in court. It came from knowing I had survived worse than rejection, worse than betrayal, worse than being unwanted. Every once in a while, someone would mention my parents or Sarah. Updates drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances. They were doing their best. Sarah's marriage was strained. My parents talked about regret in vague, careful ways that never quite landed on accountability. I didn't reach out. I didn't block the world from changing, but I stopped waiting for it to apologize properly. I learned something important in therapy, something I wish I'd known as a kid. Closure doesn't come from other people doing the right thing. It comes from you deciding you're done letting them define the ending. The house stopped feeling like a symbol of defiance and started feeling like a home. I hosted friends, cooked meals without worrying who might take something that wasn't theirs, slept deeply, dreamed without panic. One afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, I found an old notebook from my tent days. Lists of odd jobs, savings goals, scribbled in shaky handwriting. Notes to myself like, just get through tonight and don't give up. I sat on the floor and cried, not because it hurt anymore, but because that version of me deserves so much more than she got. And then I closed the notebook and put it back. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't rebuild my life to prove them wrong. I rebuilt it because I deserve something better, something stable, something honest. Family, I've learned, isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up when you're cold, scared, and alone. Who doesn't make you earn basic care? Who doesn't treat your survival like an inconvenience? I used to think being kicked out at 16 meant I was disposable. Now I know it meant I was strong enough to leave. They wanted to move in with me because they thought my success belonged to them. It didn't. It never did. This life is mine, and I'm done explaining why.